All right, so let's get started with our final chapter for the modern era from 1750 to 1900. Finally, we have arrived on chapter 24, which deals with imperialism. Imperialism. So let's talk about imperialism. Let's talk about motivations. Actually, let's start with the definition. What is imperialism? Well, we've seen this already in world history when one country tries to conquer other countries. And kind of gain control of their resources and wealth and land. So, for example, the Spanish Empire in Latin America in the 1600s, that would be a form of imperialism. But in the 1800s, we kind of see Europeans continue this process and expand it pretty much all over the world. But it's not only going to be Europeans. The Americans are going to do it, and towards the end, we're going to see the Japanese do it as well, towards the end of the 1800s to 19th century. So what are the motivations? What do you gain from imperialism? Number one, you gain resources that you need, especially if you have industrialized, right? Natural raw materials that you will need to fuel your supplies, to fuel your factories, to fuel the Industrial Revolution. And where you're going to get these resources? From colonies that you're going to conquer and take their stuff. On top of this, there's even an additional benefit in that you can create more markets for your manufactured goods. So in other words, you can sell more stuff, right, that you're making in those factories, and you're going to sell it back to the people in the colonies that you've conquered. So in a way, it's kind of like a modified version of mercantilism, because the imperial mother country controls the exports and the imports of its colonies. So a lot of economic gain is going to be the main motivation. And we're going to see that almost all, or pretty much all of Africa is going to be colonized. We're going to see big parts of Asia get colonized, Southeast Asia, and even Oceania. So what are going to be some of the effects? Right? There's going to be economic effects. There's going to be environmental effects as well. So number one economic effects is we're going to see that a lot of the local economic activities in the places that get conquered are going to be removed. What do I mean by this? For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, India was the number one exporter of textiles, right? Cotton textiles, manufactured cotton textiles, but not manufactured in factories, but manufactured by hand, right? But by the end of the 1800s, that industry is gone, right? Because it has been replaced by the mechanized industrial British cotton textiles, right? So India's economy isn't going to be producing manufactured goods or finished products. Instead, it's going to produce simply raw materials like cotton that are going to be shipped to Britain, right? To Britain's factories. So this tells us that colonies are going to become dependent on their mother countries, and their local activities are going to be restricted to whatever the mother country, the colonial power, wants. We're going to see, for example, a big shift in the production of poppy seeds being the plant that creates opium, and opium, of course, we know is going to be sold to China for maximum profits on behalf of the British. We also see that there's going to be a lot of environmental problems. So as the demand for like cash crops continue, right, because people are still obsessed with cash crops and other raw materials, the Europeans will be at least, we're going to see that there's going to be a mandatory shift in agricultural production. So instead of, for example, a farmer growing crops for food, they're going to be forced to grow crops like, say, cotton, which you can't eat and you can't survive on. Not only that, they're going to be forced to grow cotton year after year after year, because that is what the imperial power wants. They don't want anything else. So forget about growing rice or vegetables or whatever. You have to grow cotton. This will have two effects. Number one is going to see soil degradation, right? Because you're going to be growing the same crops year after year after year, and that's going to mess things up. On top of that, we're going to see famines, because people are going to starve to death because no one's growing food, because the colonial powers don't allow it to happen. So there are numerous examples of in Indian history under the British rule of people starving, millions of people starving, because the British again controlled or restricted what was being grown in its colony, and therefore people won't have enough food supply. So this sounds all pretty messed up, but in the minds of the Europeans, from the European colonial imperialist perspective, this was perfectly okay. And one of the reasons it was perfectly okay was because of racism, right? So remember, let's define racism, since it is a term that we use very loosely and call everyone and everything racist. But to believe or to be a racist is to have the idea that your race, your skin color is naturally better and superior to everyone else, not because of your personal qualities or accomplishments or achievements, but simply because of your race, because of who you're born into. And this kind of goes back, of course, racism has existed since forever, but the justification of racism begins with Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin was a scientist in the 1800s. He's the one who kind of writes about the theory of evolution through natural selection in his book called The Origin of Species. So he said, by observing animals and plants, that species can evolve over time due to natural selection, due to environmental factors, and those that can modify, that can adapt to the new environment will succeed, will survive, and pass on their genes to the next generation. And therefore, it's going to have this whole idea of the survival of the fittest, right? These species that have adapted to the environmental changes will progress and advance, and those that not will die and become extinct. So that concept starts in the 1800s, right? And we're going to see social Darwinists take on that belief and apply it to imperialism. So what do they start saying? Well, they start coming up with all these kind of like fake or pseudoscience, right? Claiming that some races of humans are naturally superior to others, right? And they're going to be using the fact that Europe is so advanced technologically, that Europe has gone through the Enlightenment and gone through the scientific revolution and gone through the Industrial Revolution first. Therefore, right, because these nations of Europe have adapted to the new world, right, to the new technologies, to the new scientific discoveries, because they were the first ones to do it, clearly it shows that they are superior to everyone else. So the idea that, that Europe is going to conquer Africa and big parts of Asia and Oceania is just natural. It is a natural way of things, right? Because again, the Europeans are naturally superior according to the social Darwinists, right? So we have illustrations like this, right, that were published in newspapers and in textbooks to make that point of social Darwinism. So again, if you see so here we see a Caucasian white European face or head with its skull, right? The skull of a modern day Homo sapien human. But then they would publish these images down here of a chimpanzee or of an African and claim that this is what the African skull looks like, that the skull was not as developed and therefore the brain was not as developed and therefore they were not equal to Caucasian white Europeans. So these are the type of fake sciences that were being published in the late 1800s, and people who were imperialists were using these fake sciences, these pseudosciences, to justify, to approve their imperialist and their racist attitudes. We also see nationalism is going to be used for justification. So remember, nationalism is the belief that your country is the best country, your nation is the best nation. And one of the best ways to show how great and powerful you are is to kind of like show the love. That's what they would have said, right? They would have believed that the Europeans are kind of responsible, morally responsible, to civilize the uncivilized parts of the world, right? To bring modernity and industrialization and a more civilized way of doing things to people who are not, industrialized. And they're going to kind of the famous literature of this time is a poem called The White Man's Burden by the author, the poet Rudyard Kipling. And basically, in the poem, he states that it is the white man's burden that is their responsibility to civilize the uncivilized parts of the world, including Africa and India. And this, again, you show how superior your nation is by taking on this responsibility and civilizing those who are uncivilized. Now, whether or not those people, those Africans, those Indians, those Australians, whether or not they want to be civilized according to the British or anyone else, any other Europeans, that's another question. We're going to ignore that, right? Because, again, the Europeans are not going to consider what these people want. Chances are they're not going to want to be civilized, quote unquote. Now, we also see religion used because we're going to see a very active missionary movement in the late 1800s. We're going to see people trying to convert others to Christianity. We see missionary work. So we're going to see a lot of missionaries head to Africa to convert the Africans, and they're going to be very successful. The proof is that right now in Africa, about 40%, almost half of the population of the continent of Africa is some type of Christian, whether it's Protestant or Catholic. About 40% are Muslims and 20% are, traditional African religions. So missionaries are going to be they're going to support this imperialist movement because they want to spread the faith and convert people. And we're going to see they're also going to bring education. They're also going to bring hospitals and better medical care. So there are some positive kind of like effects of these missionary movements that the Europeans are using for justification. Right. So here we see a political cartoon of the white man's burden, right? So we see this is, of course, Uncle Sam, and he's carrying Filipinos, he's carrying Cubans, he's carrying other people that the Americans would have been conquering and colonizing, and they're going to be carrying this heavy load, carrying this heavy burden. And just like the British in the front, they're going to be carrying Ottomans and Indians and Chinese people, and they're going to be carrying them all the way to up here. You could kind of see it in the corner to civilization, right? So this is again a symbolic political cartoon of the white man's burden. Here we see Germans. This is a German camp in Central Africa called Cameroon, in the country of Cameroon. And again, this is the German flag being waved proudly, right? So it is a sense of pride. The more colonies you have, the more proud you can be of how awesome your country is, right? So again, nationalism plays a big role here. Here we see some of the missionaries, right? In this case, this would be women missionaries in Southeast Asia, in the country of Burma. Again, so education, you can see the clothing styles are going to be, westernized clothing styles of the native women of Southeast Asia. So again, here we see some cause and effects of the imperialist movement. This is in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? Right on the transition from the modern era to the contemporary era, which is Unit 6. All right, so that's it for part number 1. I'll see you next time for the next parts.